reaction to this. Others have suggested that they may come from a home where the mother is transgressing boundaries. And what I mean by this is that the mother and the father may have, how shall I put it, the mother may find the relationship as being emotionally not satisfying. So the mother winds up emotionally mooching off of the child, which is an over-involvement with the child, and the child winds up withdrawing as a result. This combined with having a critical or impatient father. And there's been other research that's indicated that there's an association between if there's a famine in the first trimester of a pregnancy, so there's some sort of nutritional problem, that there's a higher probability that the child will have schizoid personality disorder, which in some ways is kind of hard to imagine in our culture why that would be taking place. This is a disorder which tends to be more common among males, and they would rarely seek treatment for this because they don't see anything wrong with themselves. This should be, it's estimated to be 0.5 to about 0.7% of the population, 0.5 to 0.7% of the population. People like Stone have suggested the prevalence of it is about 1%. Bottom line is it's not a very commonly diagnosed personality disorder. And interestingly enough, it's more common in Scandinavian countries like Norway, Finland, and Sweden. It's been argued that you begin to see schizoid tendencies with children or in babies. And it makes a lot of sense because schizoid personality is correlated with introversion, and introversion is one of the fundamental temperament dimensions. So you potentially would see this very early on. And these are individuals that just are out of step with their companions. And I would imagine that when you have schizoid children that are interacting with other children, what do you think of how do other children kind of relate to the schizoid child? Yeah, they may potentially make fun of the individual, the person's feelings are hurt, so they wind up withdrawing. So it could be that from a very early age, they learn that being with other people is dangerous or threatening in some way. And so as a result, they never learn social syntax because they're constantly withdrawing from various circumstances. So they learn to avoid other people, particularly the opposite sex. So what are some of the defenses that we would see? Schizoid fantasy, we've talked a little bit about this, the idea of fulfilling relational needs cognitively through this fantasy. Intellectualization would be common, and as is projection with schizoid personalities. Intellectualization is where you talk abstractly about issues, and it's as if you strip off the emotional component to whatever the issue happens to be. From a comorbidity and differential diagnosis perspective, you see this occurring with schizotypal personality, paranoid personality, and avoidant personality. And if you recall from the interpersonal circumplex, the close association of schizoid to paranoid and avoidant, which makes a lot of sense. Milan proposes a number of subtypes. He talks about the affectless type of subtype, where the individual will have schizoid tendencies combined with compulsive features. So the individual is very introverted, but at the same time very conscientious. And what's really wild about this is both of these personality disorders are associated with emotional constriction. So it's like getting a double dose of something. He talks about the depersonalized type, which would be kind of like Darrell 0, where there's a schizotypal combination. You have the languid, where it would be schizoid with depressive types of features, or the remote, which would then potentially be a combination of schizoid, avoidant, and schizotypal. And presumably of all of them, the remote would probably be the more serious, because you're involving many more features. In the DSM, there are 5 schizoid or schizo disorders. We talked a little bit about schizophrenia in the section on schizotypal personality. What's the difference with schizophrenia and schizophreniform? How are they the same? How are they different? Yeah, time is really the main thing here. Schizophreniform being shorter duration, 1 to 6 months. And how are they the same from a criteria point of view? Yeah, the criteria are identical with schizophreniform relative to schizophrenia. Schizoaffective disorder, what is that? Schizoaffective is a blend of psychosis and a mood disorder. And then we've got the two PDs we've been talking about tonight, schizotypal and schizoid. These disorders are sometimes confused with dissociative identity disorder. With these types of schizoid-related issues, we're dealing with a shattered personality, not a split personality as you would find with dissociative identity disorder. There's a lot of information here, so I want you to sort of condense it. What I'm really trying to say here is that when we look at schizophrenia as a disorder, if you draw a circle and you put schizophrenia in it, that you've got the positive and the negative symptoms of schizophrenia. So that's what I want you to draw, with the positive symptoms and hooking it up with schizotypal personality disorder, and then the negative symptoms being hooked up with schizoid personality. And this is from Robinson's textbook. I thought it was an interesting way of looking at it. This is not to say that with schizotypal personality, all of these positive symptoms are as extreme as you would find in schizophrenia. And similarly with schizoid personality, it wouldn't be as extreme as what you would find in schizophrenia. But you do see the coloring of the two. Is that making sense? It's a better way of conceptualizing how schizotypal and schizoid are somewhat linked to schizophrenia. From an assessment point of view, what kinds of things would we see? You recall that Milan talked about some of the different subtypes. So the schizoid personality is quite introverted, but diagnostically and empirically this makes a lot of sense that you would find that a schizoid and avoidant personality could co-occur, particularly if a person had a vector length on the circle which was somewhere in between schizoid and avoidant. You could get those types in combination. And similarly, you may get a combination of schizoid and paranoid as a blending of interpersonal styles. And you notice on the circle as well, the exact opposite of schizoid is histrionic, and you won't be getting generally that sort of mixture together because it doesn't make sense. When you take a look at schizoid from this diagram, the key defining feature is that the individual is profoundly introverted in terms of the big five, and then this can be compared to how schizoid is tied to avoidant. Avoidants are low, or they're very introverted and high in neuroticism. So that's one way in which we can differentiate between the two. And as I was saying earlier, schizotypal is similar to schizoid by being very introverted, but with high neuroticism and slightly low agreeableness. And this is what we find for the combinations from a stepwise multiple regression perspective. We have low extroversion as the primary factor, the single factor correlated with schizoid PD. And then when you take a look at this, you find that an element, once again, depression shows up as one of the facets. Even though these schizoid personalities may not express it, depression may be part of the clinical picture here, as well as a couple facets tied to extroversion tend to be low. And specifically, these factors are low warmth and low gregariousness, which is consistent with what we've been saying all along here.